Hi there everyone, Lars here with some writing advice brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And today I want to talk about 5 tips that I have that will improve your ability to write dialogue within your stories. And I'll be honest with you guys. Dialogue was one of the hardest things for me to nail down as a novice writer. In fact, that was one of the things that kept me from writing in the first place. Before we all got together, shared our story ideas, and Camille challenged us to actually then write things, I did not want to write out my stories, even though I had all these crazy cool ideas that I enjoyed bouncing around in my head, because I didn't know how to write good dialogue. And that's in part because, well, I'm a bit of a stutterer. You might be able to hear it if you pay attention to many of our videos, especially our live streams and our podcasts, but I do have that issue. I do have a speech impediment, something I've dealt with for a very long time. As a result of that, growing up, I either was not very good at helping to lead or take part in conversations, and then when I was able to talk, I rather dominated things, because I'm like, I want to say stuff, so I'm going to say it all before I start going, and as a result, growing up, how was I supposed to know what a good conversation was? And so when I started writing out my very first stories, oh my gosh, even though I was bad at making real conversations in real life, I could tell I was even worse at having good conversations in my own stories. So I threw up my hands and I was like, screw it, I can't write dialogue. I will never write a story. And this was one of the biggest hurdles that I had to overcome. So let me give you 5 tips. I've got tons of tips on how you can improve dialogue, but let me give you 5 tips just starting out. First one is this: expand your vocabulary and use it. Number 2, be careful about how you use cursing in your story. 3, make good use of body language. 4, it's okay to have characters talking about utter nonsense. And 5, label who is talking. So, tip number 1, expand your vocabulary and use it. I absolutely mean that, especially for a lot of young people. Your working vernacular, the vocabulary that you use on a daily basis, is minimal compared to previous generations. I use words that most of my students never have heard before or don't understand. And when I talk with my parents and grandparents, they have a much wider vocabulary than I do, a working vocabulary nonetheless. And the thing is this: if you want to write good, engaging dialogue, learn how all these different people can talk. Learn how to use different words. And this is very important because of this. We tend to write dialogue the way we ourselves naturally speak. And the danger is that all of your characters can just start sounding like you. Like you've got 20 different yous all having the same conversation. And that's very boring. Your readers will pick up on that, and they will mostly check out. So how can you avoid this? Well, people all use different kinds of words and turns of phrases, catchphrases, and the likes when they speak. And one of the ways in which you can capture this is not by simply going to Walmart and people watch. They can get really weird. It can be fun, but it's really weird, and it really won't help you out. Instead, open up a dictionary, open up a thesaurus, and get to work. One of the things that I did in my book, Knights of Halley Cruise, was that I had 3 distinct characters who I wanted to really imbue with a lot of personality. And so, for one of them, I made sure to find good words, good phrases that just led to horrible jokes. He's a guy who thinks he's really funny, but he's not. And so I had to work really hard on being able to capture that through his word usage. For another character, he's pretty easy spoken, but I wanted him, being a very small elf, to have this kind of Napoleon complex. So there's a few words and phrases that he uses to make it very clear that he looks down on everyone else who's taller than him. And it's word usage that I myself would never actually use in my real life. But I had to look it up and I had to think about it, what would work best with this character. And then for another character, she's very seductive, And those are words that I normally wouldn't use in my real life. I'm horrible at that kind of stuff. I'm horrible at flirting. So I had to go and I had to look this stuff up. And as a result of it, these 3 characters in Knights of Hallicrues are just dripping with personality. And they're so much fun whenever they're on the page. And that's because I took the time to look up the words, look up the phrases, and give them vocabulary that I myself don't normally use. So do it. Look up words, look up different kinds of phrases, use a dictionary, use a thesaurus. You will be very pleased with what's going on there with your characters. Now, don't go overboard. Don't try to make every other word a completely unique word, because that's also going to lose your audience. Think about what people would actually probably say with the personality that you give them. Now, this leads me on into my second point, the matter of cursing. Oh boy. Look, I am not trying to be some high and mighty person who is a bit of a prude and is like, you shall never have cussing in your stories. Look, I've got cursing in my stories. But there is a fine line, I believe, to be towed between using cursing appropriately within a story and then just going overboard. I have read so many stories from young novice writers who, again, write like they speak, they write like they are in high school, and as a result, I don't even know what's happening anymore in the conversation or even in the story. There's so many F-bombs getting dropped that I don't even know anymore what's going on. And it shows that there is, well, a little bit of a lack of intelligence right there, which I don't want to judge anyone for that. So instead, here's an idea for what you can do with cursing. Use your curses appropriately. You might have a couple of characters who are absolutely foul-mouthed, and that is fine. And that's what you then put into their dialogue. But for the rest of your prose, probably avoid putting that stuff in there, so that way you can highlight the nature and personality of your characters through how they speak. Another thing you can do is this, and this is something I love from other books that I've read, where the curses come out to show when a character is very angry and breaks the kind of facade that they try to throw up. Some really great examples of this would be from Amazon's Reacher, where you've got the chief investigator who's always trying to be prim and proper, but you know when he's upset when he starts cursing. Then also, I love from the Wheel of Time where you have Nynaeve who's always just super uptight, and she's always trying to set a clear example, but you know when she's losing it when she begins cursing. Curses can also be a great way of showing the differences between different kinds of cultures and different languages, because, well, we all curse differently. And that's something that you can definitely use to, again, pull out personality and pull out differences between your cast. Honestly, try it out. But don't go overboard with your curses, because you don't want to look stupid to your readers. And to be quite frank, most readers will just kind of check out. They'll just gloss over this stuff. Why? Because the more curses you put in, it actually becomes harder to follow any sort of conversation or any sort of thought. Really, it does. Try calling someone out. Like, I know it's really awkward sometimes, but try calling someone out when they just keep on cursing. Ask them to try to explain what they were saying. You'll suddenly realize they don't really know what they were saying. They're just caught up in the moment. And that doesn't make for a very good read, nor does it make for a very good conversation. Now, another thing that you can utilize to make better dialogue is body language. I read this so often where novice writers will simply write down the tone with which characters speak, and that's very important right there. However, tone is also reflected in body language. You can put in a ton of personality based on how characters are moving, their lack of movement, if they're folding their arms, if they're scowling, if they're slumped, if they're rolling their eyes. All this kind of stuff really helps to add personality to the conversation, and it can even be used to help dictate the direction and speed of the conversation that you are writing. Body language is a way in which we communicate. And we actually see a lot of miscommunication when you don't get to see other people. And when you're writing a book, you can't show what the person is like unless you put that down in the description. It's very, very easy for readers to misinterpret dialogue unless they have a combination of tone and body language to put the words into proper context. Otherwise, it's like reading a text conversation that they were not a part of. Try that sometime. Try looking at a friend's texting messages and see if you can actually follow what's going on. You'll get the gist of what's happening, but you're missing out on all of the emotion or inner thoughts that are happening because you can't see who these people were as they were speaking or as they were texting each other. You can't have been in their thoughts. As a writer, you have the power to bring that out for your audience by describing their body language. Trust me, it will elevate the quality of all of your dialogue. Now, my next tip might sound a bit controversial, and I will readily admit that. And for some people, they might not even want to touch it, but I found for myself that this works out really well. Allowing your characters to talk about nonsense. Why? Because that's what we do. We as human beings all the time talk about things that aren't really important, or just little silly things that come to our mind every now and then, or something that we're just caught up in the moment about, like a movie that we went and saw, or what are we going to eat for dinner, or man, that person on the road was so annoying, or have you ever noticed that you have a lot of belly button lint? Stupid stuff like that. And one of the reasons why I suggest putting that into your stories, why you write this, is number one, it will actually help you to explore your characters by writing this. How do they respond to just nonsense topics of conversation? I think you can explore a whole lot about who they are, what they think about, their personalities, how they would react in those situations. You can really pull out a ton by just talking about utter nonsense. And here's another thing, it's fun to write this kind of stuff, and because it's fun, especially if you're like me and you had a hard time with writing dialogue, this is a great way of overcoming that block because you're just having fun. Now, I will say this, if you do put those kinds of conversations into your stories, I would not have it run any longer than a page, and depending on the conversation that's being had, a full page might even be too much. It's okay to kind of have these little deviations and tangents, they're fun and all that, but if you go on for more than a page, you will begin to lose the thread of what the chapter was all about or what the scene was all about in the first place. And while it might be fun to read, it will lead to your audience getting distracted, and that chapter or that scene might not be quite as memorable. So really think about it right there. And honestly, there's some really great scenes in various books out there where we get to see these kinds of tangents. I would suggest looking at the Stormlight Archive, or especially Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. He has all these kinds of deviations, but again, he does not go overboard with them. It allows him then to bring out more of his characters' personalities, and we get to have some fun and some laughs and giggles, sometimes in very serious moments, but he never loses the through thread that you need in order to keep a scene or a chapter relevant within your story. So feel free to write nonsense, and in fact, you can write as much nonsense conversations as you want, but be careful with how much you put into your actual story. But allow yourself to do some of that within your story because it is fun, it will bring out a lot of your characters, and sometimes you just need a little bit of a chuckle. My last tip is this: label who is talking. It's totally fine to say he, she, it, they, whatever. That's totally fine to have within your story because you don't need to constantly say George, 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 Mary, 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 Mary. But if you do not continuously call back to who's actually speaking, your audience will at one point get lost. One of the things that's really struck me when I've watched people talk about movies is how they have a hard time recalling who certain characters are. And that's because their names aren't referred to very often within the movie. They're given a couple of times that we get their name, but other than that, it always then becomes he, she, it, they. And when we just have pronouns, well, we lose out on who's actually speaking. But even more importantly than that, it comes down to you. Remember what I said about how we often write as if we ourselves were the ones speaking, and how, like I said, you should use vocabulary and everything like that to really bring out real personality for your characters, so that way it's not just multiple variations of yourself having the same conversation. That's important. And in order to help yourself remember that it's not you speaking, but it's this particular character, use that character's name frequently. So, for instance, if I were writing about one of my main characters in Knights of Cruise, I'd say, Ben. Ben said blah, 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 blah. He was worried because this magical event was happening, and he was really afraid for what would happen to his friends. Therefore, Ben thought this, and he said da-da-da-da-da-da to the rest of the lords. Things like that really help to establish that this is indeed Ben who is speaking, Ben who is thinking, but I'm not saying Ben, 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 but I'm not also just saying he, where it then becomes very easy to miss who is the he. And if I just keep on clubbing you with Ben, 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 you are going to be infuriated whenever you see that name because you've seen it way too many times. There is a balance to strike here, but it's very, very easy, and I've seen this once again way too many times with novice writers, that they'll just put down the name once or twice and then just proceed with the pronouns because they know who's speaking, but the audience doesn't. And if you read that for too long, you begin to realize that the characters have all just kind of blended together and that they all sound the same. All sense of personality, whoop, out the window. So make sure that you are labeling who is speaking within your story, and trust me, it's going to go a long way with helping you preserve the quality and rhythm of your dialogue. So those are just 5 of the many tips that I could give you about how you can improve your dialogue. If you'd like to hear more tips that I have on how you can improve how your characters speak with each other, how they interact, please let me know down in the comments below. And I'll be happy to make more videos about this, or we can bring it up on a podcast episode or in a live stream where you can then hear what the rest of us here on Camille's Harem would have to say on the topic, because there are so many ways in which you can write your characters and character interactions. It's not just one thing. It's not just one pattern. There's so many strategies, and all of those different strategies can result in amazing, fantastic, rich characters. And that's what we want to see in your writing. So, if you're looking for more writing advice, please check out our other videos here on our channel. You can also check out our podcast episodes found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We also have writing challenges for you over at our Pinterest page, and we would love for you to join our ever-growing community of novice authors. Links for all of that and more are down in the description. And until the next video, y'all, tschüss.